Imagine waking up in a hospital and seeing the doctors looking at you with terror, as if they had seen a ghost, because that was exactly what had just happened. You had died. Your heart had stopped. However, against all logic, you were back. Now the question is, what did you see during that time? This is exactly what happened to our protagonist. For hours, he was clinically dead. But what he experienced in that state defies all explanation. Not only did he feel his soul separate from his body, but he was taken by a being of light to witness two completely opposite paths, one of anguish and the other of absolute peace. What occurred when he wanted to stay on the other side will leave you speechless. Stay until the end, because this story will reveal something that could change your perception of life and death forever. I never thought that a single night could change my life forever. But what I saw, what I felt in that place, marked me in a way that I will never forget. I know that what I am about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about life and death. My name is Gabriel, and until recently, I was someone who did not care too much about the future. I lived day by day, not thinking about the consequences of my actions. I was not a bad person, but I could not say that I was on the right path either. I let life carry me along without direction, making impulsive decisions and not thinking about what truly mattered. But then, everything changed. It was an ordinary night. I went out with some friends. We laughed, we drank. Like so many other times, the road was dark, the air dense, and the sound of the engine roared beneath my feet. I do not remember exactly what happened next, only that, in an instant, everything turned into chaos. A violent crash, glass exploding everywhere, my body thrown violently, an intense pain. Then nothing, darkness. But the strange thing is that, although I knew I had died, I did not feel fear. I did not feel pain. In fact, I felt an indescribable peace, as if I had exited from a prison I hadn't even realized was keeping me trapped. Then something happened that I will never forget. I saw my own body on the hospital gurney. There were doctors around, rushing back and forth, shouting orders, trying to bring me back. Some looked worried, others frustrated, but there was one in particular who was looking at me with a mix of terror and disbelief. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was dead. But what happened next was even more shocking. Out of nowhere, a presence emerged in the middle of the room. It didn't walk, it didn't materialize, it simply appeared. It was a being of light. I can't describe it precisely because it didn't have a defined shape like ours, but its mere presence filled the entire space with an energy that was impossible to describe. It was as if pure love was emanating from it, as if every fiber of my being knew that this being was there to guide me. And then, without saying a word, it extended its hand. I didn't know why, but I trusted it. The moment I took its hand, everything changed. The hospital room disappeared, and in its place we found ourselves in a different space, as if we were between two worlds. There was no ground or sky, just a thick, warm mist that was slowly swirling. The being looked at me with sweetness, and although it didn't speak with words, I knew what it wanted to say. It's time to understand. And then before me, two paths opened up. One was dark, heavy, as if the air within it was laden with suffering. In the distance I could hear screams, wails, a sense of infinite despair that shook me to my core. My body, or whatever it was that I had in that state, froze. The other path was different. It was bathed in a soft golden light, with a melody in the air that I cannot describe, but that filled every part of me with a feeling of absolute love. The being of light looked at me, as if waiting for me to decide which path I wanted to see first. I felt a lump in my throat. I knew I had to look at the dark path, but something inside of Me told me I didn't want to see it. It was then that he guided me, and I couldn't resist. We moved towards the path of darkness, and what I saw there made me want to disappear. The air in that place was heavy, as if every particle was charged with anguish and despair. It wasn't just a path. It was a living manifestation of something that didn't belong to this world. As we progressed, I felt a chill running through whatever my body had become. The shadows moved in all directions, stretching as if they were alive. They weren't mere figures. They were presences, souls trapped in a state of endless suffering. Some murmured unintelligible things, while others seemed lost, wrapped in a torment from which they couldn't escape. Then I realized something terrifying. They weren't there because someone was punishing them. There was no demon with chains, no blazing fire consuming them. They were trapped in their own pain, in their own choices. I saw people clinging to images of the past, reliving over and over the moments when they had caused suffering. They couldn't let them go, as if those memories were part of their essence. The being of light paused and allowed me to observe. I felt like I needed to understand something before moving on. I saw a woman crying uncontrollably, as if she were caught in an infinite loop of sadness. Then I saw a man trying to scream, but he had no voice. And further ahead, a silhouette of someone hunched over, desperately holding something in their hand. I didn't understand what I was seeing until the being of light spoke within me. Everyone is here for a reason, not because they have been condemned, but because they clung to what consumed them in life. They couldn't let go of the pain, the hatred, the fear. This place is not a punishment. It is a reflection of their own choices. I felt a pressure in my chest. I thought about my own life, the times I had acted out of selfishness, the moments I hurt those around me without even realizing it. Before I could dive into those thoughts, something caught my attention. I saw in the distance a figure emerging from the darkness, not like the other trapped souls, but with a commanding presence. The being of light accompanying me placed me behind it, as if it wanted to protect me from what was about to happen. The figure approached me with a deep, resonant voice. "It's not your time." I tried to speak, but my voice didn't exist in that place. "You need to go back," it continued. "But first you must see what comes next." Before I could react, everything changed. The darkness vanished, and we stood before an immense threshold. Before us, the second path fully opened. The light not only illuminated, but felt like a warm embrace. The air vibrated with a harmonic sound, a kind of singing that didn't come from a single source, but from everywhere at once. The being of light calmly guided me, as if it wanted me to feel the difference between the two places. With every step I took, I was filled with an indescribable peace. And then I saw it. Further ahead, a massive gate of light shone with an energy that felt familiar. Through it, I could sense something greater than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just a place. It was a state of existence. My body, or what was left of it, longed to cross over. I felt an absolute certainty that this was my true home. But at the very moment I tried to take another step, the same voice resonated firmly. "You cannot enter." I looked up. The imposing figure was standing in front of the gate. I couldn't see its face, but its presence filled everything. "You still have something to do." I tried to resist. I clung to the feeling of peace, to the light surrounding me. I didn't want to go back. I couldn't. Then I felt a gentle push, as if someone were softly pulling me away, and in that moment I opened my eyes. The cold of reality hit me like a punch. I opened my eyes wide, feeling my chest rise and fall with desperation, as if my body didn't know how to breathe again. A sharp beep echoed in my ears, and amidst the chaos, I heard screams, hurried movements, and a constant sound I recognized immediately: the monitors of a hospital. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. as if I hadn't uttered a word in days. My vision was still blurry, but I could make out the silhouette of a doctor who froze when he saw me. His eyes widened in terror, and without thinking, he ran out of the room. Laughter, sorry, I'll continue. Suddenly, a chill ran through my body. Something wasn't right. Still disoriented, I turned my head and saw another nurse, who was also staring at me in disbelief. Her hands trembled, and she muttered something under her breath, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I didn't understand what was happening. I felt my body, but at the same time, there was a strange weight on my chest, a sensation that a part of me hadn't fully returned. Then, reality hit me. I had died. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. What I had lived, what I had seen, was real. I closed my eyes and could still feel the warmth of that light, the echo of the powerful voice that had forced me to come back. You must make a choice. The words echoed in my mind with the same intensity with which they were spoken. But what did they really mean? I tried to sit up, but my body barely responded. I still felt caught between two worlds, as if my consciousness didn't know where it belonged. Then, a clear image appeared in my mind. The first path, suffering, souls trapped in their own pain. The second path, absolute peace, the light calling me with an indescribable love. And between those two, the choice, my choice. The following hours were confusing. The doctors couldn't explain what had happened. According to their reports, my heart had stopped beating for over 2 hours. There were no vital signs. For them, it was impossible that I was back. Yet, there I was, alive. My family arrived shortly after. Their faces reflected a mix of joy and fear. My mother grasped my hand, tears in her eyes, whispering prayers of gratitude, while my brother kept staring at me, as if trying to convince himself that I was really there. I didn't know how to explain what had happened, how to put into words something I didn't fully understand myself. But deep within me, I knew I couldn't stay silent. That experience wasn't just for me. It was a message, one that needed to be shared. But before I could do that, I had to understand what it meant. The following nights were a constant battle between sleep and wakefulness. Every time I closed my eyes, I would see the two paths again. I could hear the songs of the second one, but also the lamentations of the first. I felt the presence of the being of light, as if it was still close, watching over me, waiting for me to understand what I had to do. And then I understood. The judgment wasn't punishment. The true judgment was seeing our life with complete clarity, without excuses, without justification. It was realizing the impact of every action, every word, every thought. What I had seen on that dark path were not tormented souls, but rather those trapped in the consequences of their own choices. And the other path was not a reward. It was the result of a life lived with love, with compassion, with purpose. You must make a choice. Those words echoed in my mind again, this time with a force I could not ignore. My life before the accident had not been the best. I had distanced myself from many people, taken paths that led only to more emptiness, more darkness. But now, I had the opportunity to change it all, to not become one of those souls trapped in their own suffering. I knew I could not return to my previous life, not after having seen what I saw. The true purpose was not to accumulate wealth or chase fleeting desires. It was something much greater, and I had returned to discover it. The day I was discharged from the hospital, I felt that something in the world had changed. But in reality, it was me who no longer saw things the same way. Everything seemed clearer, more real, as if I had been living with my eyes closed, unaware of what truly mattered. My family was happy to have me back, but I could sense the way they looked at me, as if they still didn't fully understand what had happened. And the truth is that I didn't completely understand it either. During the first few days at home, I tried to regain my routine, but something inside me felt off. I couldn't just move on as if nothing had happened, not after having seen that place, felt the presence of that being of light, heard the powerful voice that compelled me to return. Every night, when I closed my eyes, the images returned with overwhelming intensity. I felt the warmth of the lighted path, the echo of the chants in the distance, but also the shadow of the other path, the one that made me cling desperately to the presence that guided me. I couldn't ignore it. I knew that my life up to that point had not been the best, that I had made decisions that led me down paths that were not good for me. But I had never stopped to think about the consequences, about what each choice really meant. Now, I understood that every action had a weight, that everything I did, no matter how small, left a mark. One day, while I was sitting in the living room watching my family, it became clear to me. I had come back for a reason, and that reason wasn't to continue living as I had before. I needed to change, not just for myself, but because now I knew what lay beyond. She looked at me with that tenderness only mothers can have, and without me saying a word, she asked me what was bothering me. In that moment, I could no longer hold back, and I told her everything. Not just what I had seen, but what I felt inside. The struggle I had been facing since the moment I woke up in that hospital. When I finished speaking, she took my hands in hers and, with tears in her eyes, said something that was etched in my heart. God gave you a second chance. Now it's up to you what you will do with it. Those words resonated within me with the same strength as the voice I heard in that other place, and I knew they were true. I hadn't been brought back for no reason, and I couldn't waste this opportunity. From that day on, I began to change. It wasn't immediate or easy, but each small action was a step in the right direction. I left behind the habits that had led me into darkness. I distanced myself from people who only dragged me down further. I began to seek purpose in things I had ignored before. I grew closer to my family. I valued their love in a way I never had before. And, above all, I understood that my life couldn't be just for myself. I had to share what I had lived. I had to tell others that there's something beyond this reality, that every action matters, that everything we do has consequences. The first times I spoke about my experience were difficult. Not everyone understood. Some looked at me with skepticism, others simply didn't know what to say. But little by little, I began to find people who did listen, who did understand, and who had even lived through something similar and had never dared to share it. And then I understood. My purpose wasn't to convince anyone, but to plant a seed to bear witness to what I saw, to what I felt, so that those who were ready to listen would find in my story a sign, a guide. As the months went by, my life began to take a direction I never would have imagined. The peace I felt on that path of light reflected within me, and with each passing day, I moved closer to that feeling, to that purpose. I knew I would never be the same person again, but I didn't want to be. I had returned to change, to become someone better. And even though the road wasn't easy, I knew that I was heading in the right direction. As the days went by, I began to notice something I had never perceived before. Life was full of signs, little messages that had always been there, but that I, being distracted in my own world, had never seen. They were those seemingly insignificant moments that, when you paid attention to them, took on a deep meaning. Sometimes it was a conversation with a stranger, saying exactly what I needed to hear. Other times they were snippets of songs, excerpts from books, or even dreams that seemed to bring me answers. But the strangest thing of all was the constant feeling of being accompanied. I couldn't explain it in words, but I felt a presence around me, something that wasn't physical but was still there. It wasn't fear. It was the opposite. It was as if someone were guiding me, showing me the way without needing to speak. I began to wonder if that being of light who had protected me in my near-death experience was still with me. If perhaps they hadn't just appeared in that moment, but had always been there, waiting for me to wake up and realize their presence. It was during one of those sleepless nights, when the images of what I had seen came rushing back, that I made a decision that changed everything. I couldn't keep it all to myself any longer. I knew what I had experienced was real, and I had to share it with others. But this wasn't just about telling my story. It was about helping others understand the importance of their own choices. I realized that many people, just like I did before the accident, lived without truly recognizing the significance of their actions. They acted without considering the consequences, unaware that every word, every deed, every thought left an imprint. The first time I spoke about my experience publicly was at a family gathering. Everyone was, listening to me in silence, a mix of wonder and emotion on their faces. When I finished, my mother was the first to embrace me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but not of sadness. Rather, they were tears of relief. She had feared losing me forever, not just physically, but spiritually. And now she saw that I had returned, not just alive, but with a purpose. From that day on, my story began to resonate with more people. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers who, upon hearing me, found themselves identifying in some way. Some shared their own experiences with me. Others simply thanked me for sharing mine. What struck me the most was when an elderly man approached me after a talk. He looked me straight in the eye and said something I'll never forget. I also saw the path, but I didn't have the courage to speak about it. Thank you for doing so. In that moment, I understood that many people had lived through something similar, but the fear of judgment held them back from speaking up. And then I knew that a part of my mission was to be the voice of those who couldn't speak. Over time, my life changed completely. I left behind everything that didn't serve me well and surrounded myself with people who, like me, were looking for something beyond the material. It wasn't an easy path, but with each passing day, I felt closer to the light I had seen in that other world. I knew there was still much to do, that my time on Earth was not an accident, and that I should make the most of every moment to grow and help others find their own purpose. One night, while walking alone under the starry sky, I thought again about that powerful voice that told me it wasn't my time yet. I closed my eyes and whispered with gratitude, "Thank you for giving me a second chance. I promise not to waste it." In that instant, a warm breeze brushed across my face, and although I saw nothing, I felt a peace so deep that I knew for certain I was not alone. I had never been alone. Since that day I woke up in the hospital, I knew my life would never be the same. But what I never imagined was the extent that it would reach. I began to share my experience. As I spoke with more people, I started to notice something that left me speechless. Many of them had also had similar experiences, but they had never dared to share them out of fear of skepticism, rejection, or simply because they thought no one would believe them. It was as if there existed an invisible veil that prevented us from discussing what truly lies beyond life. As if the world had decided to ignore something fundamental to our existence. This led me to ask myself a question that drilled into my mind for weeks. Why are we taught to fear death instead of understanding it? From a young age, we are instilled with the belief that it is the end, that everything ceases to exist when our heart stops beating. But I knew this was not true. I had seen the other side. I had felt the peace, the infinite love, and the absolute clarity of what we truly are. How could I remain silent after that? I knew I was not the only one who had witnessed what lies beyond. yet I felt that few dared to speak about it openly. Then I understood. My mission was not just to tell my story, but to open a door for others to dare to do so as well, not to convince anyone, but to plant a seed of reflection in those who were ready to listen. I did not seek to change beliefs or impose an absolute truth. I simply wanted to share what I saw and felt, so that each person could draw their own conclusions. Because if there is one thing I learned from my experience, it is that truth is not imposed. It is discovered. The change in my life was deeper than I imagined. I began to live with more awareness, understanding that every action, every word, and every thought has a greater impact than we believe. I became a more compassionate person, more patient, and above all, more grateful. I stopped worrying about insignificant things, and I began to value what is truly important. The connection with others, love, kindness, and the purpose of each day. One day, while walking down a busy street, I paused to observe the people passing by. I saw hurried, worried, indifferent faces, trapped in their routine, and for a moment, I wondered if each of them knew what I could see. If they had felt that peace and that clarity, would they live in the same way? Would they continue to postpone their dreams, hold on to grudges, waste time on meaningless things? The answer was obvious. No, because when you see beyond what is in front of you, when you understand that this life is just a part of something much greater, everything changes. That was my greatest revelation. It's not about waiting for the moment to leave this world to understand the purpose of our existence. It's about living each day with the awareness that we are here for a reason. It's about loving more, forgiving faster, helping without expecting anything in return, and embracing life with gratitude. Because in the end, the only thing we truly take with us is what we give. And now that you've heard my story, I want to ask you a question. What will you do with the time you have? Will you continue living as if you have eternity on earth? Or will you start to appreciate each day as the gift that it truly is? If this story made you reflect, I invite you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and don't forget to leave us a comment with your thoughts. I'll see you in the next video, but first, click on the screen to continue discovering more stories that can change your perspective on life.